Behind Greatness is a podcast series exploring the journeys and personal insights of successful leaders, anchored on themes of resilience and leadership. Each interview aims to inspire listeners to stop at nothing short of their dreams. Brought to you by Inspire North, a nonprofit organization connecting youth with today's leaders. Ready? Let's get inspired.
Welcome to our Behind Greatness podcast from Inspire. Today is Enrico Colantoni. Enrico is boy from Toronto, living in LA, and also living in Toronto. Many of you may know him from Bad Blood, which is a Netflix series based on the best-selling book Business of Blood, Mafia Boss, and Vito Rizzuto's Last War. He's had some iconic roles, including Mathazar, leader of the Thermians in the sci-fi comedy hit Galaxy Quest, and a womanizing photographer, Elliot DeMauro, in the long-running NBC sitcom Just Shoot Me. He's also received in 2019 a Canadian Screen Award nomination for Guest Actor Drama in Travelers, and has appeared in many series. There's so many to list here. There's about 5 or 6, including Good Fight, Madam Secretary, iZombie, Hot in Cleveland, Warehouse 13, American Gothic. Big screen, he's appeared in films like Stigmata, opposite Patricia Arquette, Steven Spielberg's AI, Artificial Intelligence, and Steven Soderbergh's thriller Contagion. He's enjoyed success as a writer and director. He's had an illustrious theater career background at the Yale School of Drama, where he received also the prestigious Carol Dye Award. And I can go on and on and on and on. This is about 17 pages of bio. But what I want to do is I want to introduce Enrico.
You should just give them my IMDb page and let them all figure it out.
That's perfect. And actually, it would save us a lot of time here because I want to maximize the time with you here on this podcast.
Let's do that.
And maybe we'll talk about some of your other pieces of work as well throughout the interview, Enrico. But what I wanted to say to really start us off is that you and I have spoken many times over the last several years. We first met when 5 of us founded Inspire, and you were one of the first speakers at one of our live events, our first live event back in 2011. You've been a friend of Inspire from the beginning, sitting on our advisory board as well, agreeing to partake as the victim on our first podcast.
It's hard to walk away from anything with Inspire in it, you know?
I'm glad you're reading your notes. Thank you, Enrico. Let's talk about a few things because, as you well know, Inspire is all about the importance of leadership. We wanted to have you on here, especially as our first speaker, to share with us your ideas on what you think leadership is all about. Maybe where we can start off, just so that the listeners know the kind of real you, not the people's version of you, to quote you a few years ago in an event. Where did you grow up? What was your upbringing like? How did you get to Yale and why?
Well, I grew up in Toronto. My parents were Italian. I'm still Italian. Growing up in the 60s and the 70s, the community of Italians was a little more close-knit because the immigrant mentality was alive and well. So everybody worked hard. Everybody had a work ethic just to belong. And of course, some people were much more ambitious, certainly more ambitious than my father, because my father saw his life as somebody who, I'm just going to work hard and I'm going to provide for my family without any notion of grandeur or becoming a millionaire or becoming a wealthy man. He just wanted to work. And I think that's the one thing that I've taken in my life, in my career. It wasn't the notion that I wanted to be a star. I didn't have aspirations of being a movie star by any means. My reference was I want to work hard at what I love to do. Fortunately for me, I identified with theater. It was a place where I could feel alive and not judged. Because along with that Italian mentality, you have people judging you and people telling you what to do. And my household wasn't one that nurtured communication or inspiration, intentional inspiration. Maybe I was inspired by what the family was, and I worked against that. You know what I mean? When I told my father I wanted to go to theater school in New York City, he nearly had a coronary and thought it was the end of the world, and started to enlist all my family members to talk me out of it. Because in his mind, all actors are drug addicts and, I guess, malcontents, I suppose.
And you proved him wrong.
Well, essentially, I did. But what I couldn't tell him then is that, Dad, what you taught me was how to work hard. What you taught me was I can't be lazy. This is what I choose, and it doesn't matter what I choose. I just can't be lazy about it. If I'm going to go to New York, then the intention isn't for me to just live under a rock. I want to pursue this, and I want to pursue this with all my heart and all my soul. Leadership to me is just having a clear vision of anything. The simple explanation would be don't listen to anybody. If you're willing not to listen to anybody and you're moving forward, then I think you stand a pretty great chance of becoming successful in what you had envisioned.
So when you say not listen to anybody, you mean not listen to the naysayers or the doubters. Is that right?
I think that's exactly right. The people that want to discourage you, I call them the distractors. When we think of leadership, we think of the generals on the battlefield or the CEOs of a company. Any CEO will tell you that it's everybody that has to possess some kind of leadership quality. They have to have their own sense of what they want on a personal level. They can't just be waiting to be told what to do. They have to have their own vision of what they want, what they want to bring to a company, what they want to contribute, how they want to participate. And then it's the leader that decides, well, that vision doesn't really go with my vision. But that's great, but there's no room for you here. Maybe you should start your own company. I don't know. But as an actor, I always knew that any job I got came from a choice that I made either in an audition or on the first day of work or around the table during a first reading of a script. It was always the choices I would bring to the table. And 8 times out of 10 or 7 times out of 10, somebody would recognize that and say, yes, we like that. But there's always that percentage of person who it doesn't fit for them, but it's not enough to stop me from continuing. Everybody's got their struggle years. Everybody knows what their struggle years are. Everybody has one.
The input that we're listening from you is from somebody who's already gone through a lot of experience. I mean, you're now more or less 50, maybe even younger. You look younger. But you've gone through 30 years of this. So let's go back to your struggles, because I remember when we first met, you gave us a story about your experience in New York. You were alone. You had very little support. Your family and friends wanted you to stay in Toronto and not to do acting. How hard was that? What were you living? What were you living through? How did you get through that?
Only in hindsight can I say those years were romantic in any sense. But while you're in it, they're horrible. You don't know what you're going to eat from one day to the next. You don't know where your dollar is going to come from to pay your rent. But it's always been, certainly by the grace of God. I at that time, I called him the spirit of the actor warrior. And that was the guy who just lived by faith. Whether God was conscious in my mind or not, I believed in the spirit, the creative spirit. Because I wasn't doing what I was doing out of malice, that somehow I would get support that I needed. And I always did. It was usually came in the 11th hour when I needed rent paid. A job would come in that I could support myself, but it was always in the 11th hour. And I always had to go through the darkest period. I believed in the creative spirit. And it didn't come from malice. It came from, I'm doing this out of good. I'm doing this out of love. I'm doing this because I love to do it. And of course, if the day had come where nothing supported me, then I would have rethought the whole thing. But for me, every time I leaped, something caught me. Something protected me. Something kept me along the path. I don't know what that was. I mean, I'm 56 now. I would say God is real, but we won't talk about that. But I can't not talk about it, because otherwise I would have felt I was alone in it. You put something out there, it's invisible. The imagination is invisible, Luciano. It's not scientifically proven yet how powerful the imagination is. But essentially, that's the greatest human commodity. We've survived because of our imagination, because there was a need somewhere and we filled it through our imagination. And it all started with, you know what would be great if we had this? If we had this, this would be great. And suddenly it's there.
I think I agree with that premise. However, you and I have talked about this on several occasions. It's not just imagination. You like to use a word in our conversations, and that's courage. It seems through your story, at least early on, your source was that of courage. I would also venture to say that maybe it was the example that your hardworking parents gave you as well. The value in the effort that you put into your wish or your dream or your desire. Talk to me again about your thoughts on courage and imagination together.
My parents immigrated to Toronto after the Second World War. And they weren't alone. There were a lot of people that had come from that experience and had that as a reference. And their future was tainted by those memories. And so when they came here, I grew up in that secondhand trauma of we need to keep moving. You can't be lazy. You can't stop. Because we won't survive if we don't. It was out of survival. It was out of how do we survive? So yeah, that's ingrained in me. I don't think it's ingrained in my children.
Is there such a thing as third-hand trauma?
Possibly if you say stuck in that trauma. Because I know a lot of people my generation who really never crawled out of that rock. And they say that the apple doesn't fall that far from the tree. Essentially, it doesn't, but there was something about the environment I grew up in that just didn't seem right. My trauma, not only the secondhand trauma of my parents, but I lost my sister. We lost her to leukemia when she was 10 years old. And so that changed the dynamic. Certainly, it reinforced my parents' reality of where they came from. But for me, it was like, what the fuck is this? What happened to me as a young kid was like everybody sort of became absent. And I really needed to find a new identity because it wasn't in the family. And I know a lot of people that didn't have that seemed fine with their reality. I wasn't happy with my reality. I needed to leave. I needed to go to New York. And it was a difficult process because I was alone. But that hard work, that ethic of work, kept me on the straight and narrow because it wasn't frivolous. It was grounded. It was grounded in something real. I want to make a living. I want to provide. I want to be a father one day, and I want to make money, and I want to do it out of a love and a passion that I have, not out of necessity, but out of love. And too many people today will think in terms of necessity and what they think is important.
I'll give you a quick example with my own kids. So I have young teenagers. I am also married, and my wife and I are their biggest fans and their biggest critics. My kids are both, we think now, becoming more mathematically and scientifically inclined in terms of their interests and where they want to explore. We've always pushed group work and group activities. So they play a lot of soccer. They train multiple times a week for many years, all year round. But we also insisted on our kids learning instruments and playing music. I can't tell you exactly why I've been married to that because I'm not a musically inclined individual. I like listening to music, but I don't play an instrument. But I feel as a father that it gives them a more well-rounded experience tapping into, quote unquote, the arts, because they're growing up in a world that's becoming more and more data-based, data-driven, information-driven, scientifically based, mathematically more important. I also feel as a parent that we're losing that side, but I can't speak to it with experience because I don't work in the arts. So for the folks that are listening, I guess what I'm asking is, if I'm not an actor, if I'm not a performer, if I'm not a musician, why should I care about imagination or creativity? What is it about the world that you live in, meaning your own world in your head as an artist? What is it that I could glean from it for my own kids?
Well, to me, the simple answer is any art form breeds intelligence. You go to university not for the job, but to become intelligent, to read the great writers, to study the philosophers, to people who go to school just because they think it's going to bring them security is really going down a path of disillusionment, I'm sure, for a percentage of them anyway. But for the most part, if you embrace the idea of higher education to broaden one's intelligence and make you smarter as a human being, then there's no disappointment. Learning music, taking an acting class, dance, any of those art forms expand one's imaginations and therefore make us more intelligent. We're all creative people. Architects are creative, doctors are creative, scientists especially are very creative, because creativity to me begins with the manifestation of one's imagination. And if you imagine a house and you want to build it, you're creative. Now, what I've done is sort of specialize in an art form, which not everybody does, but we can't ever forget that we're all creative beings. And without those things, Luciano, without the music, without the dance lessons, it just keeps us in this two-dimensional world. It stops us from growing. It stops us from expanding. And let's be honest, scientifically, everything is expanding. It's in continual and constant expansion. So to resist that is detrimental to us as a species. We will all die a miserable death without that sense of spirit, creative spirit, that is purely expressed within the arts, the music. Those have been around since the beginning of time. So of course, your sense, you're a smart man, you're an educated man, you're a philosopher. I know you. There's something incredibly creative about you in your business world. You know, you're a businessman, you're an entrepreneur. Those are creative things that you tap into that start with your imagination, and suddenly it manifests in the physical. The same way a painter paints, or a musician writes music, a composer composes. It all starts right there. The small little voice inside your head that becomes real and three-dimensional. So to deny your children any of that would be a detriment to their growth and their expansion. But you're tapped into it because you are creative and you're aware of it. That's the difference. We're all creative, and that's where the courage comes into play. Do I have the courage to listen to this voice when the world outside of me is all preoccupied with other stuff? That's real courage. To say, no, this is important. I'm going to go down this road because I believe this road, even though it is the road less traveled. I'm going to go down. So I congratulate you and your wife for exposing them to that.
Well, thank you. No need for that. Congratulations. But I'm glad you think I'm an awesome dad.
Yeah.
I've never asked you this question, and it's one that actually interests me a lot to hear. Who inspires you?
There were a lot of people that inspired me. There were my teachers in high school at Father Henry Carr. Blair Duckworth was one of them. Father McLean was another one. They were the ones that didn't judge me and actually gave me verbal support. My university teacher at the U of T, Kathy Smith, she was my first theater arts teacher, and she was the one who basically said, go to New York.
U of T is University of Toronto.
University of Toronto, yeah. I don't think I would have survived in New York if not for the support of all those teachers at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And then finally, my last great mentor and teacher, Earl Gister at the Yale School of Drama, the dean of acting at the drama school. And he was the last person who said, go and thrive, go have fun. And along the ways, in the professional world, there are wonderful artists that I admired that always give you support. But if it was always in the school environment, it was always in the learning environment that kept me going in New York, at Yale, always. And I think it was mostly because I listened to them.
That helps?
It helps a great deal. If you go into an environment, a learning environment, and think that you know everything, that doesn't usually work well in your favor. But if you go into a learning environment, a school environment, and just absorb it all.
Enrico, thank you. The love for you is returned and shared by our team, not just me. And we want to thank you as well for being a part of Inspire since the beginning, and inspiring so many through not only the events that we've had over the last several years, and of course the many listeners who'll be tuning into this podcast, but to all the people, especially in your industry, and all the people that have known you, Rico, growing up in Toronto. Thanks again, Enrico.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today, there's more to come. Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and learn about our live events at inspirenorth.com. You'll also find links to our social media right on our website, so be sure to give us a like and follow. Until next time, stay inspired.